Welcome to the Mediate Your Life podcast. I'm your host, John Kenyon. On the show, I guide guests through challenges and conflicts in their personal and work lives, and in their experience of the larger social political world. The Mediate Your Life approach helps people bridge differences and heal divides using principles and processes based in empathic communication, a mediation framework, and mindfulness. Each conversation is a forum for learning and healing, not only for the guests, but also for the podcast listeners. In today's episode, I speak with Rasha, who grew up in the Middle East. We work with her experience of the Palestine-Israel situation using the Mediate Your Life map for compassion for other. I hope you enjoy the episode. All right. Well, I am here today with Rasha. Rasha, thank you for joining me on the Mediate Your Life podcast. It's wonderful to have you. And would you like to, for those listening, to say a few words just about you and your kind of role in the world and your background and relevant to the things we'll be talking about?
Yes. So, hi, John. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. My name is Rasha, and I come from the Middle East, currently living in Canada. I have a background in international development, a little bit conflict resolution, and I have knowledge in NVC. And I think I have my own opinions about international events. And I think this is where our conversation will be an interesting exploration also for me to see where I'm standing, my emotions about it, and all that.
Yeah, as we talked about kind of off before this, leading up to this, that in terms of my Mediate Your Life work, there are these different maps of kind of conflict and navigating conflict. What I'll do is sort of invite one or more of these maps and kind of maybe use that as a framework to have the conversation.
Okay.
I think there are a few different things we talked about, but the main one was your experience, like kind of your personal experience, but how it relates to what's happening in Gaza, Palestine. Starting with that, there's a process we can use that's like a compassion process that starts with empathy for yourself and then seeing about empathy for the other. And we also talk too about having empathy if for what maybe we perceive there to be an injustice and a person or a group of people that are in a more of a oppressive role, and then giving empathy to that role, because that's in general the approach that I have in any kind of conflict, is to start with empathy for ourselves, but then extend into empathy for the other, and from that place to look at what kind of solutions can emerge. But we were going to talk about, given the dynamics of this situation,
Yes.
in a way, learn from what's happening or try to offer useful things for humanity around what's happening here. So anyways, there's that. And then there's another process that's about a reconciliation and healing model and an actor and a receiver. And that's also related to to this as well. But maybe we can start with this first step of the it's also called an enemy image process, where we have a judgment or a cluster of judgments in our mind, and then we kind of see the other or the other group through that lens of a kind of negative or image of somebody that's doing something wrong that we don't agree with. And so the empathy for you is the first step in that process, and what you're observing and how you're feeling in your body and the needs that you have. And we can just kind of go kind of piece by piece through your experience. And if you want, as you think about that situation and what maybe, what the aspects of it that you're observing, that you experience, that you see, and how you're feeling about it, if you want to start there.
So, in general, and I think there is many opinions around the issue, but Coming from a Middle Eastern background, being raised on a certain beliefs and certain culture, at some point I had a change in perspective towards this issue when I moved to Canada. Where I was raised, it was generalizing, right? You are taught to be looking at people who are Jewish people as Israelis. You don't differentiate between Jewish people as a religion versus Israelis as a country. When I moved to Canada, I started to differentiate. I had lots of Jewish people that I knew throughout my life here. They are so nice, and they are willing to interact with me given my background, because also we were taught that they also have some issues dealing with people from the Middle East. Having this different perspective allowed me to start seeing things differently. I learned more about the history, and even though I still believe that Palestine is the name of the country and Palestinians have the right to have their own decision on their own land, to live their life in dignity, and to have the opportunity to develop their country and to live in peace. But I also acknowledge the history of the Jewish people and how the historical events led them to Palestine and what happened behind that. However, when 7th of October happened, something just clicked and took me back to my old learnings about the situation. I was witnessing how Israel was using the power over to deal with the Palestinian situation. Then the number of the murders and the people who were killed throughout the event started to increase. It was very brutal. And now they are starving. Their city is destroyed. Everything that they worked out throughout the years to develop their city is gone. I was not able to see justice anymore. I was not able to justify anything, any action. And then when I saw the international support for what is happening to the Palestinians in Gaza, I was even more angry and sad and frustrated. I was struggling to keep my perspective around separating between the Jewish people and the Zionism, the Israelis, right? And this is where my struggle is coming from. Official announcements of the Israeli government keep dehumanizing the Palestinians, but I wanted, because I am a person who supports peace and a person who believe in humanity, I don't want to reach to a level where I'm dehumanizing the other. The amount of injustice and brutal killings of the Palestinians and the destruction that is happening in Gaza is making me, I would say, in a very bad position where I'm struggling. I don't know until how long I will be able to resist the willing
Mm,
of including everybody in this under the same umbrella, if you want.
yeah. How about I reflect back some of what I'm hearing there?
Mm-hmm.
So you were brought up in a way that kind of merged together the Israeli government with the people of Israel and the Jewish people. It was sort of all mixed together. And then when you moved to Canada, you just, as you have more Jewish friends and people you connected with, you were more and more able to make that distinction that there's the Zionist philosophy, there's the government, there's factions of the government, there's military, right? And then there's just the people of Israel. And you've been more able to see those differences and not just kind of lump everybody together.
Exactly.
But then after October 7th and the response from Israel, the way that they're using force, that it's been hard for you to hold that distinction again. It's gotten harder again because what you see is such an injustice and the suffering and the destruction. I heard how much you want to hold on to everybody's humanity and not dehumanize anybody, but it's getting harder and harder since October
Mhm.
7th has
Mhm.
continued to unfold.
Yes.
if there's anything I reflect you want to clarify, please do. And I also just want to touch into these emotions that you shared. Yeah. So not just what you've observed and how you're thinking about things, but also how you're feeling in your body. I heard you say there's anger, there's a lot of grief and sadness, also sensations in your body. What do you sort of feeling at different levels of your body?
In my stomach, I feel like it's tangling because I also had the sense that I'm helpless because I can't do anything. I can't do anything to change what is going on over there. Regardless, whatever movements, whatever we try to do, it's not changing. It's not changing what's going on. And this is also an additional frustration.
So the kind of helplessness of seeing lots and lots of protests on lots of levels all over the world, and still it just has continued on, and now starvation and deprivation of really basic needs to survive.
Yes, exactly.
Is it kind of like what you can do, or more is it just like what can be done when this kind of way, in this case like a government or a military, is responding? And
As an international citizen who has a voice that is not being heard, and I'm not the only one, there is millions of people who are like me, who are calling for stopping the violence and start acting in a humane way towards the Palestinians to begin with, and then maybe something will shift in the situation. To not have our voices heard is really painful.
yeah, so I hear you kind of going into the level of the needs that we have, human needs, that to be heard about stopping violence and suffering, and the helplessness around your voice and so many voices around the world not being heard, and that need to be heard when we're experiencing something so big and so strong and so against our values and what we want to see of how people are treated.
Yeah, so there is this need of action, the ability to act. It's also something that is important and essential for my need for meaning as well. And to see this being taken away from you, I think it's a form of violence. If it was up to me, I would be trying my best to support or try to deliver aids or whatever I can do around this issue. But even this, we've talked about the food trucks that being hit by missiles and people, innocent people who were just trying to do their role in delivering the food on a humanitarian level. They were killed. As a person who is willing to help, you are unable to help or you are unable to support those who are in this situation. It's also, I think, a form of violence, and it's causing me more anger and pain and like you said, helplessness. I can't do anything even though I would want to do lots of things.
Yeah, so this need to be able to act, to take action. So whether it's aid worker wanting to bring in food and humanitarian assistance, or is it in the people of Palestine the ability to act, to protect themselves or to flee and get away from the violence? And on all those different levels, there isn't this sort of freedom to act in order to take care of one's needs or other people's needs.
Yes. And just because you mentioned it, I don't think the Palestinians, if they have the power to act and they have the power to make decisions about their lives, that they will flee. But at least they will choose to protect their land and their existence. It's their land, they live there, it's their culture. And I think if they had the ability to make decisions, they would choose to stay in their land, and they have the right to live in dignity and in peace and to develop their country as they like. I mean, if you look at the Shifa Hospital compound. It was huge. It was so developed. It was a piece of art over there, and it was delivering health services for the people, the community of Gaza. And now it's completely destroyed. And I don't know how much money or efforts, or even if they will be able to rebuild it again. And this is also was taken from them the ability to take decisions on their own land because of the power over.
Yeah, I'd like to reflect that back. For you, it's not about fleeing away so that Israel can just have all that land, but more Palestinians want to stay and continue to see if they can have this land that they have lived on to continue living and thriving. And so the need to be able to act towards that,
Yes.
towards one's sense of place and belonging and home, and living there with dignity and peace and security. So the Palestinian people want that, and of course the Jewish people are wanting that as well. But you talked about this, the power over system, the power that Israel as a state, a government, a military has and uses over Palestinians in a way that you're saying there isn't this freedom to act to meet those needs of belonging and home and place, a safe, secure place to live.
Yes.
And you talked about the ability to protect things in Gaza that were there and now they've been destroyed.
People entire lives. I mean, if I want to compare it, because I do understand like in the West people never witnessed these type of issues. So if I want to compare, imagine your house that you worked so hard to build, and your memories inside this house, your pictures, the picture of your children when they were young, your pets, your partner, all that would be gone, and it's not your choice, or you don't have the ability to protect all this. Years and years, more than 20, 30 years. It would be lost with the decision of someone else.
Anything else you would say about when you witness what has happened in the last number of months, but maybe yeah, even beyond that, that's connected to how you're feeling right now as you witness this?
On a personal level, I want to be able to trust the humanity and the future for our children, for us, to have this sense that we are safe and secure. So I live now in Canada, like I said. To a certain level, I feel relatively safe because of the history and how the country is developed. But also, I'm mindful for my people who are still living there in the Middle East in general, and how unstable and unsafe they are in terms of how the future will fold. Our children who are living and growing over there, they don't know what is the future, what the future looks like. They don't have the safety and security to plan and build for their future, because you never know when they will be destroyed. I would like to have this more secure positioning where I trust that if I do this today to build certain thing towards my future and my children's future and my family's future in general. And when I say family, I'm not just talking about my small family, I'm talking about my large family, my people back home. I want to have this type of faith and trust that things will move towards a positive positioning.
It sounds like, yeah, wanting to trust humanity, that people will care for each other. And there's this insecurity, it sounds like, that because just of those differences between us as human beings, that what you've built for your life could be crushed, could be taken, could be destroyed. And it's the kind of history of a lot of colonialism and a lot of, ways that some groups have used power over others and dominated and taken away. So it's really bringing up these fears more intensely. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we live in 2024. The world has lived two intensive wars and many minor wars. And the colonialism history has lots of trauma and tragedy behind it. And I would think that human beings would learn from their mistakes in the past and try to prevent any future similar incidents. But instead, it's a new colonialism, right? It's a new version, but it's colonialism. If I want to speak about freedom or equality or equity, actually, not just equality, equity and human rights, whatever is that, because it's different from a culture to a culture, right? I would have expected that everybody, regardless their background, will be respected as a human being, but not being looked under or up based on where they are from, how do they practice their religion, what is the religion that they belong to. Being into 2024 with all this history behind us around the world, I would have hoped to see some change towards having these type of values on an international level.
It sounds like you just long for a world that maybe many of us kind of hope we are moving towards, but there seems still these examples of it not being there, even though maybe we're thinking by 2024 we wouldn't be doing that with each other anymore. We'd be living in a world where we respected each other in a way that this kind of violence and destroying or taking from others wouldn't happen, and yet it does happen still. So is that just like a kind of a deep sadness in you in a way to
Yes,
see that?
yes. And it's all connected, right? So having this type of understanding right now from all the incidents that I'm witnessing, and also related to my background and studies, it's making the sadness even more deep, and the frustration even harder on me to deal with, I would
Yeah,
say.
it deepens the sadness and the frustration, the grief, the
Hmm.
anger about kind of thinking that we're getting closer to the world
Yes.
that you're kind of pointing to, and then seeing there's still some extreme examples of how we're not
Well,
there yet, and it's
no.
so disappointing, right? And just incredibly painful.
And John, I know maybe you share the same hopes like I do, and I know there is many others that do have those type of hopes for a better world. Yet again, our voices are not being heard.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's a lot more you could say, but in terms of what's there for you in this moment as you look at the events we've been talking about, and maybe just kind of more general, do you feel that there's the empathy you would like in this moment for you to have your voice to be heard right now, to speak to what you see and how you feel and what you want, and feeling heard by me? Is there anything missing or not there that you would want for this moment of this conversation?
I think to a certain point, I feel more comfortable and relaxed knowing that you are hearing me, and maybe our conversation will be heard by other people as well. And maybe they will resonate to what I'm saying, and they will connect with where I am standing right now. But also, it keeps pulling me back to where, yes, I've been heard, but is it making any difference?
Mm.
Or at least contributing to a different perspective?
I guess the perspective as I see it is like this idea that we can't meet our own needs at the expense of other people's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And our
Yes.
well-being is interconnected. And for me, what's happening in Gaza, what happened in Israel on October 7th, what that in other parts of the world that are that the violence and suffering is so visible. It's just these in these massive examples of what happens when we don't try to care equally for the needs of others as ourselves.
This is part of it for sure, but also maybe with this conversation, it will contribute to different way of looking at things. I come from a certain background, which is the Middle East. I've lived conflict myself. I came to Canada. I learned the culture here and people style of living, and I do understand their way of seeing things. I do understand their experience and their background, but the people does not have my perspective and my previous experience of a conflict context of the region and the culture, and that's what I meant also. I was able to encounter both worlds, if you want to call it, and that's how I tried to build my beliefs and how I'm seeing things right now. Others might not have this opportunity or this chance. And this is where I'm trying to connect these two different ways of living, if you want to call it, together and try to show people the other way of life.
Like the world that you're living in Canada and the world that you grew up in the Middle East, and that there's just really different experiences of living, and that there can be this huge divide of not understanding or listening or hearing what people who have an experience, like say living and growing up in the Middle East, that people in the West, some maybe just aren't able to understand or listen or aren't listening to, and have just sort of judgments or ideas, but not really based on experiencing what it's like and really listening to people.
Yeah, and even there, some people don't have this type of knowledge. Like they have never been across anybody who comes from a different background, like the Middle East. So they don't know, and accordingly, they have opinions related to their culture, the way they grew up. And I think part of the change that I was talking about is about being open to others' background and cultures and trying to understand those experiences to better connect to the needs, the emotions, the lifestyle that others have.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking too about Islam or religion in the West. If you're not Muslim and you're not from a Muslim country or something, like you might have heard a lot of things about Islam, about Islamist terrorists, about, a lot of things like that that frighten people. And that's another kind of part of the dialogue in a way of people talking about things they don't necessarily have a direct experience of,
Yes.
and therefore maybe having a lot of fears about, or from your perspective maybe a misunderstanding.
Yes, of course. Sometimes I feel that a huge part of the conflict that is going on, well, just to be fair, it's part of it the colonialism mentality, but also the different way of thinking about things and seeing things. This disagreement and not being able to accept the other regardless the differences is part of a huge part of the conflict as well.
Mm. So I think it's been kind of percolating in the back of my mind. I think I'll just raise it. This just to name that in this moment that you as a woman from the Middle East talking to a white male from uh, America, and coming from a very privileged background and trying to understand, but maybe not fully. And you're trying to help me understand things. And how is that for you?
When you are reflecting back what I'm saying, it makes me so happy to have this conversation with you because of your experience, your lifestyle. You are open and willing to hear different opinions, and even though if you might not agree with that, but you are willing to listen and have this type of conversation with the other. And maybe to a certain point, we will reach to a middle point where we both understand each other, not necessarily agree with each other, but we are reaching to a point where we are able to see each other's point of view, right? Versus I had more difficult conversations with people who are entrenched in their opinions and they are not even willing to listen. So I'm
Mm,
so happy
yeah.
that I'm expressing myself, but I'm also witnessing your reflections and telling myself like, I think he's able to hear what beyond my words are, right? And yeah, this is something that I think also contributes to where the humanity is standing at, our inability to hear the other and to be willing to see things from their own perspective.
Yeah. But the sort of general idea that it's pointing to of trying to step into somebody else's experience and
Yes.
understand, even if we don't agree, that we
Mm-hmm.
can still try to understand.
Yes.
Another thing that we talked about, which is this transition, if you feel complete for the moment. Again, I know there's so much more about what we're talking about and how that is living in you.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been this first step of this I call it a map, this enemy image process map, or this compassion for other process. And we've done the first step, which is empathy for you, empathy for your experience. And then there's this potential to transition into empathy for the other.
Yes.
And something we talked about in preparation for this session was, if that invitation to empathy for other is in the context of injustice, oppression, domination, use of violence, and hurting and harming, and the kind of things we've talked about, that can be a very difficult ask of someone in your position.
Yes.
And so maybe we can just explore that a little bit without even necessarily going there yet, but just even the thought of going there, what comes up for you?
Since we talked for to prepare for this session until today, I tried to think about it. And if you recall, I was mentioning other people that I met who are very proud of their Jewish background, and now they are calling for stopping the violence in Gaza. So, this shift in their attitude made me also think about how it is for them and how painful it is for them as well. And that a little bit contributed to my willingness to go through an empathy process for the other. But again, the news that we are hearing every day, and it's still triggering me in a way that I'm unable to deal with my frustration and anger and sadness towards empathy. And like I told you, I might be able to see why they are doing this. I'm not justifying it, but I might be able to see why they are, are the needs behind their actions. But I'm unable to have this empathy towards those needs. But mentioning that, I'm still able to differentiate between the Jewish people who are human beings who wants to survive and to have the right to live in dignity, and the government who is trying to use the power over. So it's not anymore about surviving as much as we are the only ones who have the right to say and to decide. And people should live according to our wishes, or otherwise, it's a massive destruction.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah, this is when I'm disconnected and I'm able to.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to I'm so appreciating your honesty about this and just the kind of your awareness. It sounds like there's an intellectual ability to understand to some degree, especially for Israeli and Jewish people, that have very strong feelings about security and safety and those kind of things. Then there's the empathy for the people in roles of government and military that are making these decisions. You have a very hard time. You don't have the empathy for, if you're honest. And then bringing back this idea of dehumanization, like it sounds like you said because you see so much dehumanization happening
Mm-hmm.
that it's hard for you to respond with humanizing those kind of actions that look very dehumanizing and creating so much suffering and taking away life and rights and stuff for people. So it sounds like it's like that's where the empathy breaks down, like especially like a whole body empathy. You can maybe have a bit of intellectual, but to really feel the full empathy, you just realize that when you see certain things happening, that just sort of shuts you down from a certain kind of empathy.
Yes. And this is the struggle that I'm living at right now. So the way I want to put it is I won't be reacting to this in a violent way. I won't be causing more harm or trying to harm others just to react to my inability to have empathy. But I'm wondering how it is going to be to others and how they would react towards it and how much this will contribute to increasing the violence.
You still, you in yourself, you see that you don't have the wanting to take action towards a violent action and response,
Yes, a violent action.
but you're imagining or seeing that others without that empathy are triggered into wanting to respond with violence, react with violence, to like respond, reacting to violence with
With
violence.
violence.
You're saying you're worried about that, or you just have a lot of understanding for that, or
No, no, no. I have this fear. I have this concern. The reaction towards this violence most likely will be more violence and how this will reflect either on the world or the region.
the fear is sort of layers of fear, that there's the fear that the reaction to the violence of Palestinian, Arabic, in this case, people would be violence in response, and that violent response will trigger even more violence, and that ultimately you personally could be impacted by that escalation of more and more
Of
violence.
course, because I still have lots of family and friends and people I know in the region. The region is already struggling financially and economically and with all the conflicts that has been going on for years now. With this amount of willingness to go towards violence, the world could be on fire in a blink of an eye.
If there isn't a change in this case, the Israeli government and military changing and maybe even acknowledging something, acknowledging remorse, maybe that they made mistakes, that whatever. Like I think of what happened in South Africa with that truth and reconciliation process after apartheid, but that was after the African regime had fallen and it was the new government with Nelson Mandela, and at that point, a truth and reconciliation to try to heal the country, heal this incredible history of violence and oppression, right? The truth that would be part of the reconciliation was to admit we did this harm, we murdered, we tortured, we did terrible things, we acknowledge what we did,
Hmm.
and we're changing. But if that's not happening, if none of that change and acknowledgement is happening, is it even a good idea to empathize or forgive, or right, if the behavior isn't changing?
Hmm. To my understanding, empathy is not conditioned. But here we are putting a condition of I will be able to be empathetic if the person admitted what they did. Would
Yeah.
that be called empathy if it's conditioned, or it's just a healing process?
Interesting question. Yeah. I also think of Mandela. He could kind of create a nonviolent, peaceful transition, having empathy and compassion and feeling the common humanity with the Afrikaner people
Yeah.
and even the government, like the people in government. And he found a way to connect with them so that they trusted him, that it didn't turn into just this incredibly bloody civil war and it you know basically a peaceful transition to a democracy.
Yes.
But that was based on a lot of empathy that he had, but also probably the pressure of all the violence at the same time. And he gave this way forward. But all that to say that, there's this place for empathy with the enemy, quote unquote, and going all the way into the religious teachings, from Christ or other religious traditions about loving one's enemies, and very difficult to do, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't happen. It's kind of a rare human thing, but yeah, what is that shift from empathy for ourselves as the maybe feeling that we're the receiver of harm and violence and oppression and injustice, to having empathy? Yeah. Is there anything else you would say about, maybe just for yourself, if you really tune into where you are now, as we've talked about this, what would you say now?
It's still so far. I still have lots of obstacles and barriers against it.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mentioned the reconciliation and healing process, where there's these two roles in the conversation, the actor and the receiver. And the idea is that it almost like it creates the conditions for the healing that comes when a person or a group does harm or violence to another. If you want, we could explore that as a kind of just another way to come at this and see what happened if we use that process and go kind of another, maybe in a way deeper into this. But for this moment, maybe, is there anything else you want to, sort of share that's coming up for you from what we've talked about today?
I think it's a huge process, but I think right now I'm satisfied of having this type of knowledge and awareness about the situation, which is also making me more able to deal with it in a peaceful way rather than reacting in a violence way towards any triggers that is being happening around me, because I think this is also a huge part of it. It's not necessary to reach to empathy rather than being able to reduce the violence at this moment. To me, this is something is that is important.
Oh, there's a number of things you just said that I really love and want to kind of highlight. That this last piece about empathy versus reducing or stopping the violence. And because it can seem like, well, just empathize, but then the violence just continues, right? And so, how does empathy going to change any of that, right? It's not just personal, right? It's not just a personal pain or hurt or experience of violence. It's generational and it's collective. That makes it just harder and harder and harder to have empathy if it's not just a one to one person to another experience. So I just hear you kind of pointing to the magnitude of the endeavor to find empathy and compassion when it has this much larger context to it.
But it's also connected to what I mentioned earlier about the reaction of this violence. There's lots of injustice that is going on there. I wish I can do something to change it, but me reacting in a violent way will not contribute to stopping the violence. And maybe if we start to raise this awareness, that will play even a small role in reducing the violence. And
You can't get to peace only through violence. And so you're bringing up such an important thing about the reaction to violence, how to react to violence, how to respond in a way that actually heals and changes, actually reduces the violence.
Yeah.
And that's a big question of how to actually do that. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we end for today?
I'm so grateful for this conversation. It helped me to unfold things inside of me that has been going on for months now, and saying it out loud make it even clearer. And to have you repeating or reflecting on what I'm saying was even more helpful. So I'm so grateful. I hope that we will be able to reach to a level of peace and equity among humanity at some day. I still have this belief for somehow.
Well, me too. Me too. I'm just really, really grateful and moved, and just thank you. And I hope we can do, yeah, at least one more, so we can go a little further in this idea that I had towards the end there.
Yes, yes, I'm willing and open to discuss this for sure.
Thank you for listening to today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to subscribe to the Mediate Your Life podcast and follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram at John Kenyon. You can also download the Mediate Your Life app to practice these principles in your own life. With love, empathy, and care, I'm John Kenyon. Thank you for listening.